Hello and welcome to Sisters in Crime Australia and our weekly Murder Monday session where women authors talk about their crime craft. I'm Karina Kilmore. I'm a debut crime writer, a journalist and a national convener for Sisters in Crime Australia, and we've been celebrating women's crime writing since 1991. Before I introduce US author Kathy Reichs, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And Kathy, hello. But I have to say, hello, yes. I have to say we're so disappointed that you can't make the Melbourne event with Sisters in Crime cancelled because of pandemic.
I'm more disappointed, but maybe next year.
Oh, I hope so. Because as you know, 3 previous events were Sisters in Crime, and you've always attracted a big crowd in Australia. But one of the advantages of Zoom, of course, is that readers all over Australia and the world now can get to hear you. Just a few words of introduction. Kathy, you are one of only 100 forensic anthropologists ever certified by the American Board of Forensic Anthropology. Your sleuth, Temperance Brennan, who features in 20 of your best-selling crime novels, also shares your profession. Your books inspired the TV series Bones, and you were also a producer and even got to appear in one episode. Ooh. With your son, you have also co-written 10 young adult books featuring Temp's great niece, Tory Brennan. Plus, in between all your other books and collections, you've continued to consult as a forensic anthropologist, including working at the World Trade Center 9/11 site and a mass grave in Guatemala. A lot has happened since 1997 when Déjà Dead, your debut novel, was published. Welcome, Kathy. Just before we get to the questions, can you please give us your elevator pitch for your latest novel, A Conspiracy of Bones?
Well, someone once told me you should be able to summarize your book, your elevator pitch, in 5 bullet points. Ooh. So the bullet points would be a brain lesion, a faceless corpse, exile, a conspiracy theorist, and exploitation of the vulnerable.
Oh my goodness, that's so good. Okay, let's shuffle the cards.
Okay.
What's the hardest part about writing a novel?
Oh, the hardest part about writing a novel. Goodness, that's a hard question.
Yeah.
I do a lot of research. I will say that, although that's also kind of the fun part because I get to learn about a lot of areas I might not know much about because each of the books, it's a murder mystery, but each of the books is science driven. And I don't just write about bones all the time. So I decide what science is going to drive the solution. And then I have to do research into that, whether it's blood spatter pattern analysis or mitochondrial DNA extracted from cat hair or forensic linguistics or whatever it happens to be. So that part's difficult, but it's also fun. It's rewarding.
Yeah. What's the best way to dig yourself out of a bad plot hole?
Wow, I guess just keep writing, and then you can always hit the delete key if you don't like what you've written, if you don't like the way you've gone. I usually know where I'm going, so I don't really get into plot holes that I don't like. I really pretty much anticipate it. I don't make a full-blown outline, chapter by chapter outline before writing the book, but I do kind of a postmortem. After I've written, each chapter is a separate file. And so once I close that file, chapter 16, then I go and I add it to an outline. So the outline is growing as I'm reading because I may have to go back and check something. And I need to know where it took place at what point in the story.
Wow, okay. Do you start with plot or the character or something else?
I start with all three. Because I'm writing a continuing character series, I know who my main characters are. I have my core of persons with Temperance Brennan. If it's Andrew Ryan, if it's on the Montreal end, it's Skinny Slidell.
Yeah.
Happens to feature prominently in A Conspiracy of Bones because it's down on mostly on the Charlotte end. So I have her mother, her sister, her daughter. I have that. Then in each book, I introduce new characters. So I do start with characters, but I also start with the idea of what the crime is going to be. And I try to look ahead of what's going to be of interest to people 2 years down the road, because it takes a year to write the book and another year pretty much in production of the book. So for example, this story has to do with a conspiracy theorist. People are constantly bombarded with all kinds of information, disinformation. How does the average reader or viewer sort through all of that? Anybody can say anything on a blog or a website or Facebook page, or how do you know what's real and what's not? So that's the theme of this book. And one of the characters in it is a conspiracy theorist. So I start with both the people and the story and the setting. I decide where I'm going to put it. And from the beginning, I've probably chosen the science that's going to drive the story, or at least help solve the puzzle. So it all kind of floats around in my head like soup for a while until I actually sit down and begin writing.
Terrific. What started you on a life of crime? You can take that as work or as a novelist, you know.
Wow, I had never written fiction. And in 1994, I made full professor at the university. So I was free to do whatever I wanted to do. I didn't feel like doing another scientific article or textbook.
Yeah.
And I had just finished working on a serial murder case in Montreal. So I had with some really interesting elements to it. So I had the story idea and I had the freedom to try something new. So that came together in 94. And then it took me 2 years because I was teaching university full-time and commuting between North Carolina and Montreal. It's a long way if you don't know the geography here. Teaching full-time and doing forensic casework. So I had to write the book really early in the morning before going onto campus, and then on weekends and on, summer break and that kind of thing. So, So
wow.
It all came together and I started it, and it took 2 years to finish it.
Well, what's your writing routine? Maybe you don't have one, or not at the beginning anyway.
Well, I write pretty much every day. I get at it in the morning. I'm much better in the morning. And I usually try to get at it not as early as I used to, because I'm now free to just, I'm not doing casework anymore. So I'm free to write pretty much full time and focus on that. So I try to get at it between 8 and 9 in the morning. I stay with it until between 1 and 2. And then I quit and I have lunch, and then I do other things.
Yeah. And do you read over what you wrote the day before, Kathy, or start fresh?
No, as I said, each chapter is a separate document. So I open that file at the beginning of my writing session, and I start at the beginning and I work my way through editing, all the way to where I left off.
Yeah.
And that edits my work. It also brings me up to where I left off in the story.
Yeah. Beautiful. Tell us something not in your book about a main character.
Not in my book about a main character. Oh gosh.
A secret backstory.
Backstory. Well, we really know a lot about Temperance Brennan. Skinny Slidell is one of my favorite characters, and she works with Skinny in this book. He's got a girlfriend in this book. But we know that. Don't learn much about her, but it's a little astounding to think of Skinny actually having a girlfriend. He developed from a photograph I saw, a picture of a cop, an old crusty homicide detective named LaChapelle in Montreal. And I looked at the picture. I actually tacked it up on the wall, and I thought, that is my Claudel. So that's where he came from.
Oh, wow. How do you decide the scene of a crime?
That usually comes to me while I'm writing, you mean the actual final climax of the book when
Yeah,
hit over the head or thrown over a mountain?
yeah.
That usually comes to me later as I decide. Most of my books take place, not all of them, but most of them takes place either in the Carolinas or in Quebec in Canada, because I work on both ends and I've commuted between both locations for so many years. I won't tell you how many years. So it's usually one of those. Now, also, I have moved her around. She has gone to Guatemala because, as you pointed out in the intro, I went to Guatemala. She has gone to Israel because I went to Israel. Well, actually, I specifically went to Israel to research for that book.
Okay.
I was honored to be part of a USO, our United Service Persons Organization, to go to Afghanistan a few years ago. A small group of writers went together, and we went to thank our troops for their service, and they spent all their time thanking us for coming. So I was so moved by that. I set a book in Afghanistan. So I do choose, I'll never write about a place I haven't been. So I do choose either a place I've been and been impressed with. There was one book in Yellowknife, way up in the Northwest Territories of Canada. So it's just someplace I've been or someplace I want to write about, and therefore I go there to do the research about the place.
Great. What's your favorite crime fiction character?
Oh, that's a hard one. I love, I don't know if you've ever read Jasper Ford's books, Thursday Next. He has and Thursday Next is set in sort of a futuristic society, and it's a special division of I think not London, but it's in the UK, police that investigate crimes in literature. Like who stole Jane Eyre's the original Jane Eyre manuscript and changed it. So then Jane Eyre, so that's a wonderful character. I love
fabulous.
Her. Yeah.
We've had that one actually. That was Are You a Plotter or a Pantser? But I think we know you're a plotter, don't we?
I'm a plotter, but I don't do a full outline. For my son, with whom I've written, actually has a big whiteboard, and he has color-coded cards, and he breaks down every, kind of like we do in the writer's room when writing an episode for the show. Do your A story and your B story and your C story, and we break it down by, in the case of the show, an episode, we break it down into, we're not in production anymore. We broke it down into six acts. Well, he breaks everything in his books down, chapter by chapter, character by character, plot line by plot line by plot line. I don't do that.
No.
So I'm kind of a hybrid between a plotter. I begin an outline and then finish it post-mortem, as I said earlier.
Yeah.
But I know where I'm going. I know where the ending is going to be. But then after the first 6 or 8 chapters that I've outlined, I am a pantser. I do just write it.
Yeah.
So I'm a hybrid.
Do men write different crime to women?
I don't really think so. Some of the crime I've read by women is just as dark and can be just as gruesome as some of the crime fiction I've read by men. So I don't really think it's a gender thing. I think it's just a stylistic thing.
Yeah. What's the scariest thing in one of your novels?
Well, I've said this before. I think the scariest thing, and this is very apropos to what's going on in the world today. To me, it wouldn't be that I'm going to get hit over the head, by the villain, so much as the thing that's frightening in my work would be microorganisms that can catch something, and in the old days, we didn't wear masks and goggles and full swathed, and gloves and everything that we do now. We were much more casual in the autopsy room than we are today. So I think we've become aware of the little buggers that are going to get you and kill you.
Those buggers. How do you write about sex?
I really don't. I do cutaway sex when they do manage to get together, and they have a rather tempestuous relationship, she and Andrew Ryan. I'll bring them up to the moment and then end chapter, or cut away to a different scene.
How do you write about violence?
Mostly in my books, you don't see the violence taking place. You see the aftermath of the violence. And that's how it is for me in my line of work, is I don't see the violence taking place. But I'm part of a team that works on victims of violent crime. And it'll be the investigating detective, and it'll be the pathologist and the forensic dentist, the forensic anthropologist. What I happen to do is work on the victim, his or herself. So I do see the results of violence of human beings on other human beings. But in my books, I don't really portray it taking place.
Yeah. When and how do you work out your plot twists and red herrings?
Some of them I do work out, some of them I have planned ahead of time, some of them I don't, and some of them just come to me as I'm writing, and then I'll think, wow, that's great, I'm going to use that. Or I'll be researching something completely different, and I'll stumble across something that's fantastic. We're going to use, that algae can be used to suggest time since death for a submerged body or something.
Yeah. Who are your literary inspirations?
Oh, I think I'd have to say anyone who writes really well and anyone who writes really badly. Sometimes I'll read something and think, I don't ever want to write a paragraph like that because it's full of cliches, or it's just, too predictable. And then when I read something that's really beautifully written, I think, oh, why can't I write something like that? Yeah. So I'd say it's bipolar.
Yeah, no, that's great. Absolutely. How many drafts do you write before handing in your manuscript?
I write one, but I edit
as you go.
Edit, and every single time I open that chapter file, I'm editing up to where I left off. So the beginning of my chapters are really pretty slick. The endings are a little rough, but so by the time I turn in a manuscript, it's pretty clean, and I don't usually have a lot of editorial suggestions. Yeah.
And how much of a profile do you do before each character, before you write them?
I don't. I make them up as I go along.
Wow.
Well, I have full profiles for the main characters, but for those that I'm making up that are introducing, those that I'm newly introducing, I make them up as I go along.
Wow, fabulous.
I have a sense of who they are and what they've done and what their motivations are, and how they figure into the plot, but I don't sit down and write all that out.
No.
My son does.
Yes, on his whiteboard.
On his whiteboard, I think so, yeah.
And our last question for today, Kathy, how would you get away with murder?
How would I get away with murder? Wow, I'm not sure you can. I think I'd probably take the body way out in the ocean, and I'd have a reason for having access to that boat, or a way to camouflage the fact that I had access to a boat, and just weight them down and drop them out in the middle of the ocean. But you got to weight them down, because they will bloat and then float up, and then that's not good.
I'm never going boating with you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for being with us on Murder Mondays.
Thank you.